Welcome to the 140th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Barry Lancet, author of the new thriller novel, JAPANTOWN. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Barry Lancet, the author of JAPANTOWN, the first Jim Brody thriller novel. J.J. Abrams and his production company Bad Robot have optioned JAPANTOWN for TV. Barry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Sure. Well, can I have you read the first couple of pages from your new novel, JAPANTOWN?
Sure. Not a problem. Hold on just a second here.
Sure.
We'll dig it out. Right. Chapter 1, San Francisco. 2 shades of red darkened the JAPANTOWN concourse by the time I arrived. One belonged to a little girl's scarlet party dress. The other was liquid and far too human. City officials would evince a 3rd shade once reports of the carnage hit the airwaves. But long before the news jockeys began grappling with JAPANTOWN's slaughter, the problem landed on my doorstep. Minutes after receiving an urgent summons, I was charging down Fillmore in a classic maroon Cutlass convertible. Before the midnight call had interrupted my evening's work, I'd been repairing an 18th century Japanese tea bowl, a skill I picked up in the pottery town of Shigaraki, an hour outside of Kyoto. Now, even with the top down on the Cutlass, I could still smell the stringent lacquer used to fix the thumbnail-sized chip on the bowl's rim. Once the lacquer dried, I'd apply the final flourish, a trail of liquid gold powder. A repair was still a repair, but if done right, it restored a piece's dignity. I swung left on post hard enough to leave rubber and cut off 2 gangbangers tooling uphill in a flame-red Mazda Miata. A crisp night breeze swirled around my face and hair and wiped away every last trace of drowsiness. The gangbangers had their top down too, apparently the better to scope out a clear shot. They slithered in behind me, swearing in booming voices I could hear over the screech of their tires, and in my rearview mirror, angry fists shot into the air as the sleek sports car crept up on my bumper. A pistol appeared next, followed by a man's torso, both etched in ominous shadow against the night sky. Then the driver caught sight of a police blockade up ahead, slammed on his brakes, and snaked into a U-turn. Drastic change in direction flung the shooter against the side of the car and nearly into the street. Arms flailing, he managed to grab the frame of the windshield and drop back into the Miata's cushioned bucket seat as the car peeled away with a throttled roar of frustration. I knew the feeling. If I hadn't received a personal invitation, I'd have done the same, but I had no choice. A marker had been called in. When the phone... Okay, we'll stop there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about JAPANTOWN yet, how would you describe the novel?
It's a mystery thriller, and it opens in San Francisco, JAPANTOWN, with the perfect murder. There's 5 bodies and 1 clue no one can read, and that 1 clue is a Japanese kanji, and kanji is one of the ideographs they use in the writing system. And then Jim Brody, the protagonist, who's a Japan expert, and he's an American born to Caucasian parents in Tokyo, and grew up there, went to the local schools, knows the culture, and is basically knows pretty much everything there is to know about Japan, is called in by the San Francisco police because he now lives in San Francisco, and he slowly tracks down the meaning of the kanji. And it takes time, and step by step he deciphers the kanji. And when he looks, and he tracks it from San Francisco to Japan, and then he looks back over his shoulder and he sees, well, he's tracking the kanji. Somebody's tracking him.
Gotcha. So, well, as the title suggests, and as you just explained, Jim Brody, your protagonist, travels to Japan, and I know that you've lived in Japan for many years. What led you to Japan originally?
I always had a desire to live overseas. I grew up on the West Coast in California, and I was born in Ohio, but basically my families are from California, so I grew up there. But I wanted to see more of the world, and that was from a very early age, maybe from the beginning of junior high. And by the time I got to college, I sort of decided I would like to work overseas in publishing for a while, maybe in London, maybe in Paris. And I took a few years off from school to work to get some money and then travel. And I met some Japanese folks who said, well, if you're going to travel, why don't you come to Japan? And I said as a joke, well, maybe I'll take the long way around to Europe. And I meant it as a joke, but in the end, that's exactly what I did. I went there first. I was amazed and astounded with how modern yet how mysterious the place was. And then I went from there to London and Paris, and then I came back for a while. And then I went back to school, and something just drew me back eventually.
Gotcha. And when you moved to Japan the second time, did you know how to speak Japanese?
The first time I went, I didn't know a word, but I picked up, I don't know, maybe 300-400 words and a dozen phrases. That's about it. But because I was there for a few months, and then when I went back to finish my last year at college, I took quote unquote a year of Japanese language there. I actually I was able to do that. But it was the quarter system, and a year means 10 weeks, 10 weeks, and 10 weeks, which is hardly enough for such a complex language. So by the time I went back, I knew a few more phrases and a few more words, and I had a basic understanding of the grammar. But it still took time to learn it. But I did learn the language eventually.
And what was that process like for you? Not only learning the language, but also kind of learning about the culture. Because how long have you lived there now?
Yeah. Well, my original intention was to go for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured that in 2 years I could learn everything. I'd become fluent in the language and I'd learn the culture. And so many people that had gone there and went for 2 weeks and then started writing stories. They didn't have much depth to them. So I figured, well, if they could do that much in 2 weeks, in 2 years, I should be able to do a lot. Well, after 2 years, I barely scratched the surface, and my language ability had made progress, but it was very slow. So I thought, well, I've got to do this. So I gave it another 2 years. After that, I taken another step forward. That was about it. So things suddenly jumped up. My language ability skyrocketed. My understanding deepened quite a bit, and I was able to communicate with people, and I learned a lot. My job gave me access to insider view of things I didn't have. And so by the 10th year, I really had a very good handle on it.
And so I know that you worked in book publishing in Japan. What led you to write Japantown? Had you always wanted to write a thriller or mystery novel?
I may have lost you. You still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I said, I know that you worked in book publishing in Japan. What led you to write Japantown? Had you always wanted to write a thriller or mystery novel?
I'd always wanted to write something. I got interested in reinterested in books in college, and I read some books that were just blew me away. I thought, well, I could do this, and I want to do this. It seemed interesting, so I had this idea to write a book. I just didn't have a subject. And when I went to Japan, I had a subject, but I didn't know it. It took me a while to, as I just said, to figure out the place, because Japan and her people don't reveal themselves very quickly. And so I had the idea to write a book. I had an idea to write something about Japan. And then one day I got hauled in by the police for a non-criminal charge and interrogated by a very crafty police inspector. And sometime after that, it was a fascinating encounter. It was this cat and mouse sort of exchange. And sometime after that, I said, well, okay, I've got the book, I've got Japan. Maybe I can do a mystery thriller sort of thing. That's how it started. But it developed in stages like that.
Mm-hmm. And given that you know the editorial process and how publishing works, was there any surprises for you to be on the other side of the desk, so to speak, as a writer trying to write a compelling novel?
It's a lot more fun. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed publishing. I enjoyed being an editor for a number of years. I mean, to me, it was an ideal job. And for a lot of people in Japan, they used to come up to me and say, "Where did you get that job?" And so many people, tried to get in similar jobs in Tokyo. There just weren't that many. But when this happened, and suddenly I found, I didn't have the daily commute, which was, which in Japan is a little bit challenging. You're in a commuter train with tens of thousands of other people in one train, and I didn't have that. All I had to do was wash up, clean up, get dressed, and walk down the stairs and around the corner, and I was at work. That was a very pleasant change.
And given both your editorial and now as an author yourself, what advice do you have for aspiring writers who may be listening?
There are several things. The most important I would say is do something every day. If you want to write and you feel you need to write, make sure you do something every day. The people often say write every day, and that's true once you're doing it full time. But if you've got a day job or a family or other responsibilities, you often can't carve out that time you need to write. So the next best thing is to do something on your book every single day. And that can be, outlining a chapter. It could be thinking about a character, working on a bit of dialogue, any number of things. But and if you can't get, the couple hours that would be nice to have, even a half hour, 15 minutes, 5 minutes is enough. Just keep doing something every day. And if you do that step by small step, you'll end up with a finished manuscript.
Great. And what books and authors have you read lately that you would recommend or that made an impact on you and that you would mention?
I read very widely. What am I reading now? Actually, unfortunately, I'm writing so much. I'm not reading very much at the moment. It's amazing how much time that takes. But I'm reading. Because I'd spent some time in Italy a few years back, I'm reading The Monster of Florence, which is a true crime thing by Douglas Preston. I've got, what else have I got? I've got People Who Eat Darkness by a guy called Richard Lloyd Perry, which is a story. These are two well-written true crime novels. I actually don't read much true crime, but suddenly I have these two novels on my desk, these two true crime books on my desk. I read Lee Child, of course, and Robert B. Parker, although he's not writing much anymore. Right. Well, maybe he is writing much.
Yeah.
But I mean, I reread his stuff on occasion.
Sure.
And there are a number of interesting things around.
Great. Well, what are you working on now? What are you writing?
I'm working on the second Jim Brody novel. That's almost done, and I'm getting ready to start the third. When I first got the initial contact about Japantown, it was initially going to be a one-book deal, but we got to talking with the woman who eventually became my editor, and she heard I was working on a second book, and in the process of negotiation, one book became two books, as long as it was another Jim Brody novel. They seemed to really like the character. They liked the direction he was going in. And his name is in the contract.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Barry Lancet, author of Japantown, the first Jim Brody thriller novel. The book is in bookstores now, so definitely grab a copy. And Barry, thanks for doing this interview.
My pleasure, Jeff. It's great talking to you.
In 2020, we all miss seeing friends and loved ones. With the U.S. Bank Altitude Connect Visa Signature Card, it's easy to reconnect again. Earn 5 times points on prepaid hotels and car rentals booked directly in the Altitude Rewards Center. Earn 4 times points on travel and at gas stations. 2 times points on groceries, dining, and streaming services. Plus, get 50,000 bonus points when you spend $3,000 within the first 120 days. That's a $500 value. Learn more at usbank.com/altitude connect. The U.S. Bank Altitude Connect Visa Signature Card is issued by U.S. Bank National Association, N.D. Some restrictions may apply. Member FDIC.